The first time I saw her, the afternoon light was slipping softly through the tall classroom windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden desks. The air smelled faintly of old books and lavender, something calm and quietly reassuring that seemed to settle around her like a familiar cloak. I was new to this quiet corner of the city, and sitting here, waiting for our session to begin, I felt the familiar buzz of nervous anticipation. She entered with a quiet grace that made the room feel instantly warmer. Her steps were deliberate but light, like she moved through space with a confidence that had nothing to prove. She wore glasses, thin-framed, perched low on her nose, and when she looked over them at me, there was a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just authority. It was a softness beneath it, like she had learned the power of patience long ago. Her eyes met mine, steady and curious, as if she were quietly trying to understand me in a way that didn't require words. When she spoke, her voice was calm but held an unexpected warmth, like the steady hum of a fireplace in a quiet room. "Close the book, darling," she said, the hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It's time for a different kind of lesson." Her words felt like a gentle invitation, and though I wasn't sure where she was leading, I felt drawn in. She pulled a chair closer to mine, the soft scrape of its legs against the floor almost echoing in the silence between us. The faint scent of her perfume brushed against me, a delicate mixture of jasmine and something woodsy, while her fingers absent-mindedly adjusted her glasses. There was something in the way her hand moved, slow and intentional, that caught my attention. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. A quiet confidence, a calm control, and maybe just a hint of vulnerability hidden beneath the poised exterior. As she spoke again, guiding me through the first pages of the book, I noticed how her eyes softened when she smiled, how the light caught the subtle lines at the corners of her eyes, lines that told stories of years lived fully, of laughter and quiet resilience. I found myself watching how her fingers traced the edges of the pages, lingering just a moment longer than necessary, as if savoring the texture of the paper. There was a stillness between us that didn't feel awkward or forced. Instead, it held the promise of something unspoken, an exchange not just of knowledge, but of understanding. I felt an unexpected calm settle in my chest, a slow quieting of the usual rush of nerves. In that moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. Outside, the city moved on, but in here, between the scent of books and lavender, the soft light and the gentle cadence of her voice, something quietly shifted. I didn't know it yet, but this lesson would be unlike any I'd ever had. And somehow I was ready for it. As the days turned into weeks, our lessons settled into a quiet rhythm. Soft-spoken exchanges, shared silence, and moments where the air between us seemed to pulse with something unspoken. I began to notice the little things. The way she would brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear with a slow, deliberate motion, as if hesitant to disturb the calm she carefully maintained. Sometimes her hands trembled just slightly when she reached for her teacup, and I wondered if the steadiness she wore like armor was more fragile than I first thought. Our conversations were often about the book, but I felt there was a deeper dialogue unfolding beneath the surface, one that neither of us dared to name. Her eyes would sometimes linger on mine a beat too long, glimmering with quiet curiosity or maybe a flicker of hesitation. When she caught me stealing a glance, her lips would curve into a gentle, knowing smile, but her gaze would soften, as if inviting me to look closer without speaking. One afternoon, the late sunlight spilled through the window in golden slants, warming the room in a way that made every shadow feel alive. She leaned over my shoulder to point out a passage, and for a moment, our skin brushed. A fleeting contact, electric and unexpected. Her fingers rested lightly on my forearm, the touch feather-light but charged with an unspoken message. I could feel the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of my shirt, the steady pulse beneath her touch, and a sudden rush of something I couldn't quite place. Her presence was magnetic but measured, never crossing the lines she seemed to carefully draw. Yet, in those moments of quiet closeness, the space between us felt impossibly small, like a fragile thread connecting two worlds. I found myself watching how she held herself, the way her shoulders relaxed just a fraction when she thought no one was looking, or how her eyes would glisten ever so slightly when she laughed softly at a dry joke I made. Those small cracks in her composed facade made her feel achingly real, and I longed to know the stories behind those delicate moments. Sometimes, when she handed me a page or corrected a word, her hand would briefly cover mine, the skin-to-skin contact warm and grounding. I could tell she was aware of it too. There was a pause, a breath caught between us, and then she would pull back just enough to keep the distance intact. Each touch was a whispered promise, a question left hanging in the quiet space between words. The room, once just a place to learn, had transformed into something else entirely. A sanctuary where time slowed and our guarded hearts could speak in silence. The faint rustling of pages, the ticking clock, and the distant hum of the city outside all faded into the background, swallowed by the weight of unspoken feelings and the tender vulnerability in her gaze. I knew we were walking a delicate line, balancing on the edge of something that felt both thrilling and terrifying. And yet, in every glance, every gentle touch, I sensed a quiet invitation, an opening to a different kind of lesson, one far more intimate than any book could teach. That afternoon, the quiet between us stretched longer than usual. We had been wrestling with a difficult passage, one that seemed to stubbornly resist every attempt at understanding. The words on the page felt heavy, like a barrier between us, and frustration settled over the room like a thick fog. I remember how her brow furrowed slightly as she sighed, the delicate crease between her eyebrows deepening with each attempt to explain. Her voice, usually steady and composed, wavered just enough to catch my attention. There was something vulnerable about it, a crack in the carefully maintained poise she wore like a shield. I was fumbling too, caught between wanting to understand and wanting to offer something more. My hands shook slightly, a nervous tremor I couldn't quite hide. It was the first time I realized that beneath her confident exterior, she might understand struggle on a deeply personal level. She wasn't just a teacher imparting knowledge. She was someone who had been shaped by hardship, who carried her own silent battles. Without thinking, she reached out to steady my hand. Her fingers curved gently around mine, the touch unexpected and electric. It wasn't a bold gesture, but the warmth of her skin against mine spoke volumes. Her hand was cool at first, but quickly warmed, and I could feel the subtle pulse of her heartbeat beneath her delicate touch. It was steady, reassuring, a quiet anchor in the storm of my restless thoughts. For a moment, the room fell away. The only thing that existed was the connection between us, the slow rise and fall of her breath, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the warm afternoon air, and the soft pressure of her hand holding mine with careful tenderness. I swallowed hard, aware of the subtle shift in the energy between us. Her eyes met mine. No words, just a silent understanding. The hesitation that had defined so many of our interactions melted into something warmer, more immediate. The air around us seemed charged, but she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers tightened just slightly, as if inviting me to accept this quiet reassurance. The gentle warmth radiating from her touch felt like a lifeline, offering comfort and permission to lean in, even if only a little. As I looked closer, I noticed the small details, the way her nails were perfectly manicured but natural, the soft tremor of her hand as she held mine, and the way her lips parted just a fraction, as though she wanted to say something but held back. The lesson faded into the background, forgotten for now. This moment wasn't about words or books anymore. It was about something deeper, something unspoken but deeply felt. When her fingers finally slipped away, the warmth lingered on my skin like a whispered promise. I realized then that whatever this was between us, it wasn't just a passing feeling. It was a beginning, fragile, hesitant, but real. And just like that, the rules I thought I understood started to unravel. The boundaries blurred, replaced by a tender connection that neither of us could ignore. That evening, the room felt different, softer somehow, wrapped in the gentle hush of twilight. The usual distance between us had thinned, and for once, the walls that kept her carefully composed persona intact seemed to falter. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed in a way that suggested more than just a long day's work. I wondered what thoughts were tucked behind that poised exterior, what stories lay hidden beneath the surface. She settled into the chair across from me with a quiet sigh, fingers tracing the rim of her teacup absent-mindedly. The flickering candle on the table cast warm light across her face, highlighting the subtle lines around her eyes, lines that carried a lifetime of laughter, sorrow, and resilience. For the first time, I saw not just my teacher, but a woman who had known more than her share of solitude. Her voice was softer than usual when she spoke, the usual certainty replaced by something fragile and almost hesitant. "There was a time," she began, pausing as if gathering courage, "when I thought I had everything figured out. But life, it doesn't always follow the lessons we expect." I leaned forward slightly, drawn in by the rare vulnerability in her tone. The weight of unspoken memories filled the space between us. She spoke of quiet disappointments, the ache of missed opportunities, and moments when the world seemed unbearably heavy. Each word came slowly, like peeling back layers she had long kept hidden. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she folded them in her lap, and without thinking, I reached out to brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. My fingers lingered just a moment, tracing the soft curve of her temple. The touch was gentle, tentative, a silent offer of comfort. She didn't pull away. Instead, her eyes met mine, glistening faintly in the candlelight. In that gaze, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't expected: trust. It was a delicate thread, fragile but strong enough to pull us closer. The quiet steadiness of her heartbeat felt like a secret shared between us, a reassurance that neither of us was alone in this moment. For a while, we simply sat there, the room filled with a silence that wasn't empty but full of meaning. It was a space where words weren't necessary, where presence spoke louder than anything said aloud. In her quiet confession, I found a reflection of my own uncertainties and fears. The age gap, the differences in our worlds, the invisible walls built by society's expectations, they all seemed to dissolve in that shared vulnerability. And yet, beneath the fragile edges, there was a warmth, a hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rewrite the lessons life had taught us. Together, as the candle flickered and the night deepened, I realized that this moment was more than a pause in our lessons. It was a turning point, a quiet invitation to explore not just the words in a book, but the stories etched on our hearts. The days that followed were heavy with silence, the kind that felt thick enough to fill the small space between us. The warmth and vulnerability we had shared seemed to retreat, replaced by a cautious distance neither of us dared to bridge. I could feel the tension twisting inside me, a mixture of longing, doubt, and fear. I kept replaying that evening over and over in my mind. Her soft voice, the way her eyes glistened with unspoken pain, the way her hand had rested so lightly against my skin. But now, as I sat across from her, I was acutely aware of the invisible walls that had risen back up between us, solid and unyielding. It wasn't just the age difference or the roles we played. It was the weight of expectations, mine, hers, and the quiet judgment of the world we lived in. The thought of stepping beyond the boundaries we'd carefully respected felt like walking on a fragile line stretched taut over an endless chasm. Sometimes I caught her watching me from across the room, her eyes soft but clouded with hesitation. There was a flicker of something tender in her gaze, quickly replaced by a guarded calm. I sensed the same war raging inside her, that silent tug between desire and restraint. One afternoon, the tension became almost unbearable. We sat side by side, working through a complicated passage, the silence between us charged with all the things left unsaid. My fingers brushed against hers by accident, and I froze, heart pounding. She didn't pull away immediately, but the fleeting contact was enough to remind us both of the risks. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she glanced away, biting her lower lip in a way that made me ache to reassure her, to tell her it was okay to want this, to want me. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself clenching the edge of the table, feeling the rough grain under my fingertips as if it could anchor me. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance, but the weight of hesitation held me back. What if the connection we shared was only a momentary escape? What if crossing this line meant losing everything? She cleared her throat softly and spoke, her voice almost too quiet to hear. "We should focus on the lesson," she said, but there was a fragile tremor beneath her calm. I nodded, forcing myself to meet her eyes. Of course. But the truth was, the lesson no longer mattered. The quiet conflict between us was undeniable. A dance of emotions tangled with fear, longing, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Every glance, every touch held 1,000 questions, none of which we were brave enough to ask aloud. And yet, beneath the hesitation, a quiet hope flickered. Maybe this hesitation wasn't a wall, but the beginning of something more delicate. A chance to find a way forward that honored both our fears and our desires. As the afternoon light faded and the room grew colder, I realized that this struggle, the internal battle between heart and mind, was as much a part of our story as any lesson in a book. Sometimes the hardest part of love isn't the passion, but the patience to wait for the moment when the hesitation finally gives way. That afternoon, something shifted softly, almost imperceptibly, like the first stirrings of a breeze through still leaves. We were sitting side by side at the worn wooden table, surrounded by the familiar quiet of the room. The late afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, casting long golden slants that wrapped around us like a warm embrace. We were passing a book back and forth, our fingers brushing lightly as our hands met over the spine. It was such a simple, almost accidental touch, but the sensation was electric. The warmth of her skin against mine, the subtle tremor in her fingertips, the slow pulse that seemed to echo beneath our gentle contact. It all spoke louder than words ever could. Our eyes met, and in that shared glance, the hesitation and questions that had haunted us seemed to dissolve. Her gaze softened, vulnerability and something deeper shimmering in the depths of her eyes. There was no rush, no pressure, only an unspoken agreement, a quiet acknowledgement that something between us had changed. Her lips curved into a tentative smile, the kind that held both promise and a hint of uncertainty. I felt my chest tighten, warmth spreading through me like sunlight after a long winter. The moments before had been filled with tension and longing, but now, there was a calmness, a steady pulse beneath the surface that felt like hope. She shifted closer, the space between us shrinking by just a fraction. The scent of her perfume, jasmine mixed with something earthy and grounding, brushed against my senses, and I found myself breathing it in deeply, anchoring myself to the moment. Without words, our hands intertwined, fingers weaving together naturally, as if they had always belonged. The touch was tender but sure, a silent promise that neither of us was alone anymore. I could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat beneath her palm, matching my own. There was a softness to her that had always been there but now felt more open, more accessible. The subtle rise and fall of her breath, the gentle warmth radiating from her skin, and the way her eyes held mine with quiet intensity. It all pulled me closer in a way that was both thrilling and comforting. The room around us seemed to fade away, the distant sounds of the city muted by the stillness between us. Time slowed, and I realized this was more than just a turning point. It was the beginning of a new chapter, written not with words but with touches, glances, and the shared understanding that had blossomed quietly over time. She leaned her head just slightly, the movement so small it could have been missed. But to me it was everything, a gesture of trust, an invitation to step forward together. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a mixture of anticipation and peace settling over me. In that moment, the boundaries we'd both guarded so fiercely softened, replaced by a gentle connection that neither of us needed to explain. It wasn't a grand declaration or a dramatic confession. It was a silent affirmation, a delicate, beautiful shift that said, without words, "I see you, I'm here, and I'm ready." The day finally came when the quiet tension that had lingered between us gently unraveled, like the soft threads of a well-worn tapestry coming undone in the gentlest way. We found ourselves sitting side by side, not just as teacher and student, but as two people who had quietly crossed invisible lines and discovered something tender, real, and unexpectedly profound. The room felt alive with the soft hum of shared understanding. The afternoon sun poured in through the windows, bathing everything in a warm, golden light that seemed to bless this moment of quiet arrival. It was no longer about lessons or books, but about the connection that had blossomed over countless small touches, lingering glances, and whispered confessions. Her fingers found mine first, weaving between my own with a familiar ease that spoke of comfort and trust. The simple act was electric, yet gentle, like the steady rhythm of a heartbeat shared between two people who had come to know each other deeply. I could feel the warmth radiating from her hand, grounding me, and I squeezed hers lightly in return. We talked then, not about complicated theories or hidden meanings, but about us, about the delicate dance of emotions that had brought us here. Her voice was calm, steady, and full of a quiet joy that warmed my chest. She spoke of fear, yes, but also of hope, of the courage it took to embrace something unconventional, and the strength found in vulnerability. There was laughter too, soft and genuine, filling the space between us like sunlight breaking through clouds. We shared stories, dreams, and the small details that made us who we were. And as she spoke, I noticed how the lines on her face seemed to soften, how her eyes sparkled with a new light, one born not from youthful illusion, but from deep, lived experience. In that moment, the age between us felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge, a testament to the paths we had traveled and the lessons we had learned. It was clear that what mattered most was not the years, but the depth of understanding, respect, and affection we held for each other. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding in that sunlit room. We leaned into each other, foreheads touching lightly, sharing a breath and the steady beat of two hearts slowly sinking together. Her cheek rested softly against mine, warm and real, and for the first time, I let myself believe in the possibility of us. When she finally pulled back, her smile was tender, filled with a quiet promise that felt like home. "We've come a long way," she said softly, her fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from my forehead. I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm ready for whatever comes next." The tension that had once defined us melted away, replaced by a calm certainty. We were no longer just teacher and student, no longer confined by roles or expectations. We were two people who had found each other in the quiet spaces between lessons and had chosen to walk forward, together. As the sun dipped lower and the room grew warm with fading light, I felt a peaceful happiness settle deep in my chest. This was our story now, one of patience, trust, and gentle love that bloomed slowly but surely. And in that slow-burning light, we were finally home. If you felt the quiet heartbeat of this story, and the slow unfolding of something real and tender, please like and subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moments spoke to you the most? Drop a comment below, and let's share this journey together. Until next time, take care of your heart, and remember, sometimes the most meaningful lessons are the ones we never expected to learn.